that is.
Okay. There's a couple extras.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The presentation is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back your hosts, Amy Holm and Bob Perciasepe.
Thank you very much. Hope everybody enjoyed the lunch and the presentations during the lunch and had some good training sessions. I've heard great things about those sessions. So welcome to our opening plenary session. Very excited. We've got a full packed couple hours here of really fascinating speakers. Very interested in hearing from them and their perspective. We're going to delve into what government and energy providers are doing right here in Michigan and hear how local and regional climate leaders are collaborating with leaders around the globe to address the climate crisis. We will also hear from sustainability leaders from international companies who are working to decarbonize all across their business and supply chains and create a sustainable circular economy. Before we get started, I do have some housekeeping notes for you here, and sorry, but I failed to mention this earlier during the luncheon comments. But we're also a handshake-free zone, if so you desire, and there are many ways that you can greet each other if you prefer to do so. So Bob and I are going to model a couple of those right now. So first, there's the age-old favorite, the fist bump. There you go there, and then there is the elbow tap. And then Bob has invented a new one, which is called the foot tap. So you have a choice of three right there. Feel free to avail yourselves to those with your fellow attendees. I also want to spend a few minutes right now saying thank you so much to our wonderful staff at C2ES and the Climate Registry. We couldn't be here without you. Bob and I have a very easy job here. We have the easiest job, and all the staff here is working really hard to make your experience exceptional this week. I also want to thank all of our sponsors, starting with our headline sponsor, America's Pledge, and our host city sponsor, DTE Energy. And thank you also to the hosts of today's workshops and training sessions for starting off CLC in such engaging and energizing way. Another thing I want to let some of you know about, if this is the first time you've been attending the Climate Leadership Conference, is about our conference app. And there are a lot of benefits for signing on to the app and using it. You can find out about speakers and sessions and have access to documents that are attached to these sessions. We'll also be making updates and announcements from the conference organizers to the attendees. And it's also a great way to find out who is in the room, what attendees are here. And then if you want to meet with them and set up a time to connect, it's a great way to do that. We will also be live streaming this session and three other of the plenary sessions, and those are available on our CLC YouTube channel, so you can subscribe to those and you'll see the full sessions afterwards. Also, we'd love to hear your thoughts during and after the Climate Leadership Conference, and so feel free to tag us on social media using hashtag #TheCLC. With that, I'll turn it back over to Bob.
I thought for a second there we were going to try to dance or something, but it's serious stuff in terms of everybody's individual issues and concerns in terms of the different coronavirus issues. So sort of be calm and carry on. I want to say I want to echo Amy on what a tremendous set of working sessions and training sessions we just had. I had a chance to sit in and listen, and I'm really impressed with the work. But my job right now is a really pleasant one. I'm going to introduce Jerry Norcia, who's the CEO of DTE, and you just heard they're our host city sponsor. And under Jerry's leadership, DTE has been setting some very ambitious goals, including net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And I'm sure he'll speak to this when he comes up to the podium. But DTE Energy has been part of a big part of our ability to have a successful conference here in Detroit. Not only are they the host city sponsor, but they've also been a fantastic guide to us and to the Climate Registry in connecting us with other institutions and players and interested parties in the Detroit and Michigan area. And so we're very grateful for the work that they have done to help us have a successful conference. I also have to say one other last thing before I ask Jerry to come up, and that is DTE itself has been a really wonderful help and source of information and advice to the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions as we struggle to help companies think about how they decarbonize and how they become more efficient and deal with technology issues. DTE has always been there with advice and sage advice for us. And now that they're moving out even more aggressively, I can only see that increasing. So Jerry, I hope you can come up and then we'll look forward to hearing your comments.
Well, thank you, Bob, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Detroit. I hope you're enjoying the city of Detroit. Lots of things to do in Detroit, and hopefully you'll get an opportunity to taste some of the great food in Detroit and maybe experience some of the local entertainment like jazz clubs and other many venues that are exciting here in Detroit today. We're also honored that we are the host city sponsor for the Climate Leadership Conference, the first time in Detroit. How cool is that? So we're really excited about that, and it fits quite nicely with our agenda as a company. DTE's aspiration is not only to be the best operated energy company in North America, but also a force for growth in the communities where we live and serve. And some of the things we're doing to reach that goal of being the best in the world is through our clean energy investments and emission reduction efforts. We're the largest investor in Michigan in renewable energy. To date, we've invested about $3 billion, primarily in wind energy, and now we are starting to pivot towards solar energy. We've got some of the largest renewable operations east of the Mississippi River, which is something that we're really proud of. In 2017, as Bob mentioned, we put some very aggressive goals out there for carbon reduction. And last year, we announced that we were going to reduce our carbon emissions by 80% by 2040. In 2040, we'll retire some of our largest carbon-emitting resources. And by 2050, we're looking to be net zero. So very exciting. We've certainly highly engineered, company with a lot of engineers, engineered how we're going to get to 80%, but we have a lot of work to do to find our way to a net zero position by 2050, and we will be working with groups like you to find our way there together. As CEO of DTE Energy, I'm proud of these accomplishments, but I think what's more important than the accomplishments themselves is getting people to understand the why behind what we're doing to combat climate change. The transportation sector and power industry are the largest emitters of carbon, and as such, we have a responsibility to lead on this issue. If we don't take decisive action, we don't stand a chance in effectively addressing our carbon reduction goals. It's incumbent on us at DTE Energy to lead on this issue. It is a responsibility that we take very seriously, and this issue is not only one that we tend to lead on, but we also intend to win on, and I believe that together we can do that. And I think it was a genius decision to host this conference in Michigan because there is a cross-section of companies here in this state that are acting on climate change. So you know that Consumers Energy, another large utility in the state of Michigan, recently announced an ambitious net zero commitment. The auto companies are making substantial investments in electrifying the transport sector, and I'm proud to be an EV owner, and I love my plug-in hybrid. I hope that at some point I can buy a local vehicle that's 100% electricity. I know there's many of those coming shortly, so that's I'm excited about the advent of that. Whirlpool is another home state company that is going above and beyond in its efforts to make more sustainable, energy-efficient products, and that helps everyone who purchases Whirlpool appliances reap cost savings on their energy bills. And when you make something more energy efficient, it obviously has less emissions or creates less emissions. Kellogg's, based in Battle Creek, is implementing a sustainable farming innovations aimed at reducing emissions. This is really important because of the people often overlook that the agricultural industry in Michigan is a $100 billion industry. So adopting more sustainable farming practices is another way to reduce carbon. So excited about that. I'd also like to call out the outstanding leadership of our elected officials. Climate change is not a siloed issue that can be solved in isolation. It's going to take comprehensive team effort, and leaders such as Governor Gretchen Whitmer, U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow are helping to propel us in the right direction. Governor Whitmer launched the state's first advisory council for environmental justice and is a huge supporter of the Paris Climate Agreement. Senator Stabenow recently released a report which documents the impact of climate change in Michigan and outlines how the state is poised to lead the way in addressing this challenge. So from our elected officials to our Michigan industries to local environmental groups and foundations, we're working together as a team to tackle this issue. And I think this conference is designed to keep the momentum going for us. When you think about regions of the country where climate advocacy and innovations are taking place, sometimes it's easy to think that Michigan doesn't come to mind first. But the fact that Amy and Bob have agreed to host this prestigious conference here says a lot about the great work that has taken place in and around the Motor City. And so it's an awesome reflection of Amy and Bob's tireless efforts to broaden and create a more inclusive army of climate advocates. So thank you both for your leadership on this issue. And in closing, when I look around this room, I see so many people with all the same goal to protect the planet for future generations. And I was mentioning to one of my colleagues this afternoon, it's even more especially important to me that my son and daughter-in-law are expecting a baby this week, any day now. So I may get a phone call while I'm up here to go, but it gives me that much more inspiration to really make climate change an imperative for us as we go forward. So next month, we'll celebrate Earth Day, and at DTE will mark the 50th anniversary through significant actions all month long. We'll commission a new wind energy park here in the state of Michigan, sponsor several large tree planting events across the state, and announce a new infrastructure initiative for EVs. And we're not stopping there. We're fundamentally reshaping the way energy is produced in Michigan, and we are committed to moving the environmental agenda forward nationally. It is my hope that you all leave this event more informed about the climate crisis, but also more inspired to take on tangible actions to combat it. I tell my people all the time, I like goals, but I like accomplishments even more. So I look forward to working with you. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Jerry, thank you so much for those comments and your leadership, and thanks to the entire DTE team, whose many are here today and will be here tomorrow, for the work you're doing, and for all the help you've given us in helping bring this conference to fruition. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
Thank you, Bob. And now I would like to introduce a very special guest, Liesl Clark, who's Director of Michigan's Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, and she's speaking here on behalf of Governor Whitmer. Liesl?
Well, I am so fortunate to welcome you not only to the beautiful city of Detroit, but to the great state of Michigan on behalf of Governor Whitmer. We're so excited that you're here. Many of you are aware we are home of four of the 5 Great Lakes, which results in 20% of the fresh water that exists in the world right here in Michigan. We have more than 3,000 miles of shoreline, and in our 83 counties, you are no more than 7 miles from a body of water, no matter where you are in our beautiful state. So we're so excited to have this climate conversation here, and I hope to echo some of the comments of my previous speakers that you get a chance to really enjoy not only the state, but also the city. We are celebrating a lot of things in Michigan right now. Certainly, as we all are, celebrating the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. You might be aware that Michigan played a key role in the early Earth Day, the first Earth Day, with our partners in DC and across the country. We're also celebrating a lot of other things that happened in 1970, including the National Environmental Policy Act, the creation of Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. If you haven't been there, you definitely should check it out. The EPA officially took effect, the Clean Air Act, and then very important to us, the Michigan Environmental Protection Act. On top of those anniversaries, there's also anniversaries from 1980, including a conversation at the University of Michigan. I am a Spartan, but there are some wonderful things that my counteracting school down the road does from time to time. University of Michigan held a conference in 1980 that put on the map the conversation about environmental justice and really started that discussion that then escalated from there at EPA. So back in the day, climate change was a novel conversation and not at the forefront of all that we do as it is now. But it really is around our mission of protecting public health and the environment, key and vital to everything that we do. This administration, under the direction of Governor Whitmer, has taken bold steps to move Michigan forward on climate. And I want to talk to you a bit about what we're doing to think about how are we protecting our 10 million bosses, as I like to call them, and how we're thinking not only about the adaptation issues and the stress issues that are caused by climate, but also equity and ensuring that low-income residents and communities of color are provided with the tools to both adapt to climate effects and that they'll benefit from climate initiatives like clean jobs and green infrastructure. So what's happening on climate in Michigan? Well, there are some tenets that we all abide by, and one of the first ones that I'm sure you'll talk about here in the next couple of days is that climate's local. So it's about what's really going on in the communities, cities, and places that we live. It's about city work, it's about urban and rural work together. And we talk about climate commitments, and we talk about big numbers, and we talk about big goals. And a lot of times we think about big cities and big progress that's happening. However, okay, did everybody learn the Michigan map? Get out your Michigan map. In tiny little Northport, which is way up at the tip of the pinky, over there by Sleeping Bear Dunes, tiny little Northport is about 500 people, and that is a very small village with a commitment to 100% renewable energy. So it's not just about our big cities, it's also about our small rural areas and about lifting up all that work that's happening and creating more momentum. It certainly is about beautiful Grand Rapids, Ann Arbor, and even here in the city of Detroit, the sustainability commitments and the climate initiatives that have been started here. But our goal is to lift up all that local climate work. Climate is definitely about mobility. So in the city and the state that put the world on wheels, when we think about where emissions are going, and we all know that the transportation sector has surpassed other sectors in terms of global emissions, part of this solution has to be a mobility solution. Michigan is at the forefront of advanced mobility and is taking the entire world along with us as we move forward. When we talk about mobility in Michigan, we talk about automated, we talk about shared, we talk about connected, and we talk about electrified. Governor Whitmer just a couple of weeks ago announced the Office of Advanced Mobility and Electrification, and all of those pieces need to come together in order to move us to where we need to go for climate reasons as well as for advanced mobility reasons. Climate is about building infrastructure that will weather the future. We have so many infrastructure challenges, particularly in a state that was industrialized early. And when we do that rebuild, we want to do it in a smart way. We want to build smart cities. We want to host it on the core of Internet of Things. And in the course of doing that, it's got to connect to our advanced mobility solutions to really move us forward. Climate is about protecting our Great Lakes. The one thing that you'll hear from all of us Midwesterners, particularly from those of us in Michigan, is how committed we are to our 20% of the world's fresh water. Lake Superior, one of our largest lakes, is actually one of the fastest warming lakes on the planet. When we think about impacts to cold water trout streams, we look at the challenges of harmful algal blooms, and then we look at the increase in crop killing pests on farms. We know that we have to think about this in a holistic way. And in fact, we're seeing a magnification of level changes, of water level changes in Michigan right now. We've gone from the record low to record high levels in record time in our state. We are at the longest 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year wettest period on record, and we just got done with the wettest September to December on record. So what does that mean? It means that the Great Lakes are at all-time highs. It means our groundwater is fully saturated. It means our lakes and streams, our inland lakes and streams are fully saturated. So when we have simple storm events, it's a really big deal. When we have those record storm events that we all know are happening more regularly, it is devastating. And it's not just about homes that are falling into the lake. While that is absolutely a private property concern that we're really adamant about and making sure we're supporting the improvements that have to happen to help those folks, it's also about infrastructure challenges. It's about wastewater treatment plants. It's about the $100 million estimate that our MDOT has made for the 40 road projects that they have that are already having challenges because of water infrastructure. It's also about agriculture. In Michigan, we're the second most diverse agriculture state in the nation, and we plant around 10 million acres. Last year, we didn't plant 920,000 acres, so about 1%. This year, we think it'll be even more, and it was because of how saturated our state is. So it's an economic issue as well. Climate is about health and quality of life. We all know that we have challenges when it comes to public health impacts from climate, not only urban heat islanding effect and consequences for our cities disproportionately impacting our low-income and communities of color, but also, as I mentioned earlier, flooding challenges that come from climate and vector-borne illnesses like Lyme disease, West Nile virus, and certainly EEE. When we think about priorities around health and climate, we think about respiratory diseases, we think about heat illnesses, we think about those waterborne diseases, vector-borne diseases, and certainly injury and CO2 poisoning from extreme weather events or the outcome of having these extreme weather events and needing to react to them. So what are we doing about all of this? Well, in Michigan, we're all about action. Out of the gate, Governor Whitmer, when she signed the executive order that created the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, she also signed Michigan up to be part of the U.S. Climate Alliance. She also created the Office of Climate and Energy, and Dr. Brainy Brown will be with us here in a couple, or will be with you here as part of the agenda. The state has also been working at the governor's direction on lead by example activities and paralleling what other states are doing and trying to move it forward so that we're making sure that we've done our own work internally first. We're also modeling to inform our next steps. So how do we think about what are the impacts of emissions statewide? So not just from a state of Michigan, not from a government perspective, but more broadly from there. Michigan Public Service Commission has seen 2 new commissioners that started. Dan Scripps started about a year ago, and then Tremaine Phillips in the fall. There's been the statewide energy assessment since then. The Michigan Power Grid, for those of you that are interested in the intricacies of utility markets and how we're transitioning, that's an interesting thing to go look at on their website. In June of last year, the governor created the UP Energy Task Force, and I've had the opportunity to lead that effort. The first recommendation that will come from that group shortly will be about if there was a propane disruption to the Upper Peninsula, but then the second recommendation will be looking more broadly at what can we do to think about how to influence our Upper Peninsula. For those of you that aren't as familiar with Michigan, the UP has over 13 just on the electricity side, energy suppliers, which results in some areas them having the 3rd highest rates in the nation behind Alaska and Hawaii. So it's geographically very spread out, and it has a very low population, making it a tough to serve environment. So that's been an interesting component of how do we make sure we're serving all of our constituents here in the state. And then there's a litany of legislation that's been ongoing, as well as administrative actions to remove barriers and streamline permitting. And you've already heard a little bit about some of the commitments that our utility partners have been making in the state, including DTE's 100% carbon neutral goal by 2050 and consumers' net zero carbon emissions by 2040. And I don't have enough time, but I'd love to talk to you even more about some of the EV infrastructure work that we're doing in state and the electric school buses, some of the kind of really cool projects that get a lot of attention and activity from those future generations. So all of this adds up to real progress for Michigan, and we are super excited that this conference has chosen to be here today. With that, I just wanted to let you know that I appreciate the chance to come here and be with you, and again, sharing with you the governor's regrets. I talked to her this morning, and she said that she was really excited about this conference and about the lineup. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a great event.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Liesl, for those wonderful comments and learning more all about what Michigan is doing. Next, I'd like our panelists for the panel titled Bright Spots in International Climate Leadership to join me on the stage, please. So Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes of Wisconsin and Patricia Fuller, Canada's Ambassador for Climate Change, and Rachel Kyte, Dean of the Fletcher School, Tufts University. How's that going? You can go wherever you'd like. We'll fill in. Either, yes, I can sit here and there we go. Okay. All right, all set. Thank you. Well, my background is in international environmental relations. So as a wonk in that area, if somebody asked me what would a dream dinner be with your guests, this would be it right here. So I'm terribly excited about this panel and speaking to all of you and hearing your thoughts about what's happening on the international stage from each of your perspectives. So first up will be Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes of Wisconsin, and it was a great honor for me to get to know Lieutenant Governor Barnes this past December in Madrid at COP26. He was a participant in the Climate Registry delegation of U.S. subnationals attending COP, and he brought this great spirit and inspiring message to Madrid and was a very popular figure there and really added to the conversation and understanding of what was going on, especially in the heartland of the United States in terms of climate action at the subnational level. Lieutenant Governor Barnes, who at the age of 33 had already served in the Wisconsin State Assembly, and he's become a remarkable advocate for Wisconsin's ambitious climate goals. As a leader of the state's task force on climate, he's been convening a diverse coalition to make sure that more voices are heard on issues which affects everyone. Lieutenant Governor Barnes, nice to see you again.
It is great to see you again, too. That was COP25.
That was yes.
I hope to make it to 26.
I think it was a Freudian slip that I'm talking about COP26.
Oh, no,
so
I have to go now.
Now you have to go. You've all heard it right here.
True.
Yes.
It's great to see you again, too. And I just want to thank you all for having me here today. I want to thank you for participating and having me be a part of this conversation. The work that we're doing, especially across Wisconsin, but all across the Midwest, and I've mentioned before, especially being here in Detroit, I think it's apropos that we think about how we transform the Rust Belt into the Green Belt, because there's just a world of opportunities. And earlier you talked about Michigan. Now Michigan, when she did the little map, she couldn't use two hands. There's an extra little piece. I want to make very clear that belongs to Wisconsin, but. And you try to take credit for all the lakes too. You mentioned Lake Superior, Lake Michigan. Those are our lakes also. And so, but it was a good point too about Superior and how that's warming up quicker than the rest of the Great Lakes. And what could be expanded on that is the fact that economies are going to pay the price as a result. We have trout streams in Wisconsin also that are warming up relatively fast, and that's a $1.6 billion industry in our state. Not to mention Lake Michigan's water levels are at record highs right now. So we do have a lot of work to do, but there are some amazing and exciting things going on that aren't just happening on the coast, aren't just happening on the East Coast or happening in California or Washington. And I'm proud of the goals that we do have. We understand what challenges we have to meet those goals, but we also understand what unique opportunities, because we don't have oil, we don't have coal, I don't think we have much natural gas in Wisconsin either. So the fact is, this is an opportunity for us to create an entirely new economy. And that's how I try to approach the conversation when I talk to people. And you look at the larger, or I would say the more ambitious, climate movements is led by young people, as any other social movement has been throughout the world's history. But you also see a lot of younger elected officials who are stepping up and putting climate at the forefront, putting climate as the leading issue in their entire platforms. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Andrea McClellan, who's here. She's on the City Council in Norfolk, Virginia. The two of us co-chair a working group of elected officials from the New Deal, which is developing exceptional American leaders. It's a cohort of elected officials, all levels, government, local, and state. And we are tasked with putting together a climate policy plan for elected officials at every level of government, so we can address this not just at the sub-national level. We can do this at city, county level as well, to make sure that we are doing all that we can do. And it's through that type of work that you get to have the best ideas. You get to see innovation that happens, and you think about things that you wouldn't necessarily think to address depending on where you live. And with our agriculture industry, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us as well to look at other ways that we can generate energy, whether it's biodigestion, whether it's carbon sequestration. I mean, the world is wide open for a state like Wisconsin and many other Midwestern states. You look at Iowa, who's basically going all in on wind, and they are providing an example of leadership, because that is a Republican-controlled state, and there are conservatives who are willing to do the work. We just got to find them and get them to help influence the other ones across the country. But the governor in Wisconsin, when we were first elected, the very first words that came out of my mouth were, "We are bringing science back." And it was a very long night. And I've been sharing this story a little bit more because usually election results come in around 9 o'clock when the polls close at 8. So I had a drink at 9, and then 10 o'clock came. I had another drink. And 11 o'clock came. I had another drink. I started getting a little concerned. Midnight came. I had another drink. So by 1 a.m., when the results finally come in, I'm like, time to take the stage. I was like, okay, all right. And I just get on the stage in front of hundreds of people, and I was like, oh, we're bringing science back. And so that's kind of how I got involved in this work. But, unfortunately, unlike in Iowa, we don't have the legislature on our side that's going to help us move this agenda. So all the work we've been doing has been through executive order. The governor created a new position, or a new office, I should say, the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy. The governor also created a task force on climate change, which I have the opportunity to chair. And that task force, we bring together people from all walks of life, from all corners of our state, from many different professions, disciplines, and backgrounds, because we want to have all voices. And we want to make sure that impacted voices are at the table too. We have representation from our Native communities, we have utilities, we have students, we have higher education, the list goes on. And I always want to encourage people too, when you put together these tables, we need to be very conscious of who sits there, because many times we don't have the impacted voices at the table. I've been at many meetings where we'll have discussions about poverty, and everybody at that table has a decent salary. Or been in rooms where we talk about homelessness and nobody's experienced homelessness, addiction, the list goes on and on and on. So we want to be very intentional about the people that we bring together to have this conversation. And that table can continue to grow, but we want to make sure that we have all perspectives, or as many perspectives covered as possible. And not to mention the governor's, our 2050 goal was also through executive order. We put it in the budget originally, but they took it out of the budget. That's kind of hostile, legislature that we're dealing with when it comes to anything that we try to do to combat the climate crisis. That's the response that we get. So through executive order, we're going to do everything that we can, and I think that we have some amazing partners. And through hard work and with so many different local leaders who stepped up and made commitments to address the crisis. I think 2050 is way farther. I think we can get this done by 2035, or if we all do the right thing. It's not going to be easy, of course, but if it were easy, we wouldn't have to do it. And with that said, I think that is my 7 minutes. So appreciate you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And so we're going to have all the panelists speak and then open up the room to questions. So if you can think about your questions and keep them towards the end, that would be great. So next I'd like to introduce Patricia Fuller, who was named Canada's Ambassador for Climate Change in 2018. She previously served as Ambassador of Canada to Uruguay from 2004 to 2007. And as Ambassador to Chile from 2012 to 2015. Ambassador Fuller also attended COP25 and hopefully COP26, and spoke on the Registry's UN official side events about the importance of subnational climate leadership, along with representatives from Mexico and the US, including Lieutenant Governor Barnes. So it's an honor to welcome back Ambassador Fuller to the Climate Leadership Conference and a Registry co-hosted event. So please welcome.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's great to be once again in the United States. I always say I'm surprised in this role how often I travel to the United States, and not just to the UN, but to places all around that are acting on climate. And so that just goes to show that there's lots of leadership taking place at various levels in the United States. And a special pleasure to be here in Michigan. Michigan is Canada's #1 trading partner, bar none, around the world. So, and that has a lot, of course, to do with the auto industry, which is, as has been said already, central to the climate challenge. And also a state that we share so much water with, and that's also a very important part of our relationship with Michigan. So, real pleasure to be here. And I'd just like to talk to you about what Canada is doing in terms of our commitments on climate change. We certainly are committed fully to the Paris Agreement and committed to addressing what we see as an existential threat, but also committed to what is an opportunity in terms of the economic transformation that needs to take place to meet the climate challenge. We have a lot of clean tech talent and innovation taking place in Canada, a lot of trade with the United States in the clean tech sector. So lots of bright spots there. And we are, of course, committed to the science, and the science says we have to be at net zero by 2050. So Canada has joined the 120 countries that have made that commitment to net zero emissions. Last November, we stated that we would meet net zero emissions by 2050, and also that we will exceed the target that we've set for 2030. So let me tell you a little bit about where we are in that work, because targets are one thing, but actions are another. And for the 2030 target, we put in place in 2016 the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change, which was an exercise involving work with all of the provinces and territories, Indigenous peoples, businesses, non-governmental organizations, and really all Canadians to put together that framework, which has carbon pricing as a central pillar of it. And that is now in place across Canada, a mix of systems, in some cases provincial and in other cases federal, but also a range of other measures, some 50 other measures, including regulating the phase out of coal, including regulating reduction of methane emissions, and including investments in electric vehicle recharging and clean tech and public transit and a whole host of other measures that at this point we estimate will get us most of the way to our 2030 target. But to fill the remaining, we have recently announced some new measures, more action on electric vehicles, more action on public transit, and importantly, nature-based solutions. And I think this is an area of great interest in Canada, in the United States, and around the world, where there's really a growing recognition that to meet the climate challenge, we also have to restore and protect nature. And to meet the biodiversity crisis, we of course have to meet the climate challenge. So our nature-based solutions commitment includes the planting of 2 billion trees over 10 years, as well as restoration of wetlands and other actions that can absorb carbon and build resilience to climate change. So those are some of the things we've added to the Pan-Canadian Framework. And now turning to the work around the net zero emissions target. This is a big project, big challenge. The Prime Minister, in addressing this just last week, said this will take all levels of government working together, businesses, Indigenous peoples, and really all Canadians to come together to develop this plan and these pathways to net zero emissions. We're really encouraged by the number of businesses that have made this commitment, including in the oil and gas sector. We've got Cenovus, CNRL, MEG Energy, just to name a couple that have made the commitment to net zero emissions, as well as global companies in other sectors. So this is a wave that is coming, and we're beginning that work to find those credible pathways to that goal. Part of this also is our commitment to support global ambition, and that's where we are working through, of course, the Paris Agreement, but also a series of alliances and coalitions that seek to support the full and effective implementation of the Paris Agreement. So the Powering Past Coal Alliance that we lead with the United Kingdom, and which now includes 97 members worldwide, including a number of US states, a couple that were with us right from the start, and a number of US cities. And this is really turning the tide on coal and on the need to phase out coal-fired electricity worldwide. Another example would be the Global Commission on Adaptation, where again we have as part of the convening membership members from the United States. And there we have a number of action tracks we're pursuing this year, leading up to a summit in October in The Hague. Canada's pleased to be leading the Nature-Based Solutions action track with Mexico. And then a third one I'll mention in terms of alliances is the North American Climate Leadership Dialogue with Mexico and the U.S. Climate Alliance states. And that's an engagement that's very positive and very important to Canada. So we're committed to continuing to work with all of our partners in the United States. Again, thank you very much for having me here at this conference. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Patricia. And next is Rachel Kyte, who's Dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. Prior to joining Fletcher, she served as Special Representative of the UN Secretary General and Chief Executive Officer of Sustainable Energy for All. She was also the World Bank Group's Vice President and Special Envoy for Climate Change, leading the Banks Group's efforts to shift its operations and campaign for the Paris Agreement. So I'm very happy to have you with us today, Dean Kyte.
Well, thank you very much, and it's always lovely to be in Michigan. When I first moved to the United States a very, very long time ago, I went back to Europe a few times. The very first business trip, I was living in New York. The very first business trip I made was to Michigan, to a conference at MSU on sustainability, and I remember staying in a hotel sort of on the edge of campus, and I'd never been west of New York City and didn't quite know what to expect, and checked into my room and went downstairs. And went into the bar and was a little confused. And there was a Star Trek convention going on. And I was like, And I said, well, I just want to have a drink and something to eat. And they're like, you can come in if you won't laugh at us. And I just thought that was very sweet. So anyway, that was my first experience here. So glad to be back. I think we're at a critical point, and that's why this conference and this year is so important, which is that we have to be smart enough as the people who know, right? The question our kids will ask us and our grandkids will ask us is, what did you do when you knew, right? So we know. And so we have to be able to hold two things in our minds at the same time. We have to hold this idea that we will decarbonize the economy before 2050. And we have to also at the same, which is the marathon, right? And we have to hold in our minds the sprint, which is that before 2030, we have to have done enough to bend the curve. Bend the curve of emissions, bend the curve of quality of air so that people can continue to breathe in the fast urbanizing cities of the world. Do enough to be able to invest in the resilience of small rural communities and big urban communities around the world, and do enough that we can buy ourselves the time to sort out the really difficult last remaining pieces of decarbonisation. And we've got 10 years because the science now tells us that we don't have as much time as we thought we did, even in Paris. Paris was only 5 years ago. It feels a lifetime ago because of the updating of the science, and because we're already starting to see the implications of the feedback loops and the tipping points in the natural systems. And so, here we are in the Northern Hemisphere. If we don't bend the curve in the next 10 years, if the Arctic continues to deteriorate at the rate in which it is at the moment, if that feedback loop, that the deterioration of the Arctic continues to show us, if that continues, then we lose control of the planet's climate systems. And then really we get into territory we don't want to be in. So for the business leaders here, The good news is that we're seeing more and more companies coming up with science-based targets, more and more companies in every sector of the economy showing leadership. So zero net commitments by 2050, mirroring the countries that are coming out with these commitments. I think actually what's interesting about the business commitments is that they often have steps in them. So, you know, where they will be by 2030, where they will be by 2040, and that's in stark contrast to some of the government commitments. Some of the government commitments are zero net by 2050, and they're very vague about where we're going to be by 2030. And actually, there is a lesson to be learned by government from the way in which business says, okay, well, we're going to be here by 2050, working back, where will we be by 2025, where will we be by 2030? So we have to be able to explain why it's really urgent that we do things now, and then what the trajectory is to 2050. And that has to be the basis of the dialogue at the local level, at the city level, at the state level, at the national level, and at the international level. That we have to do both at the same time. We have to be able to sprint, and we have to be able to win a marathon to 2050. I think what gives me hope is that you've seen, even in the first few weeks of this year, the drip, drip, drip from every sector of the economy. You've seen announcements which would have been unthinkable from Microsoft, from BP, from Repsol, from, and I could go through every sector of the economy. You see the shift in the financial markets. You see the impact of the Climate 100. You see the impact of the investors. Yeah, the BlackRock announcement got all of the attention. There's so much devil in the detail, we don't yet know whether that will have the kind of traction it could. But the pressure on passive investment to actually start leading rather than following, the pressure that comes from having well over $100 trillion now saying it will be transparent under the TCFD, the pressure that comes from the European Central Bank doing stress testing of national banks, the pressure that comes from 38 central bank governors saying that they are going to start looking at the macro critical risks involved in climate, the pressure that then goes to investors, and then the investor pressure on firms is beginning to show that something is beginning to ratchet up. And so I think we are at a moment where we've got a pincer movement of pressure starting to penetrate very, very early days from the financial markets, and then the pressure that comes from the street. And so when I sit with CEOs and with business leaders around the world, what they're telling me, and I think that would be echoed in this room from the conversations I've had today, is that, you know, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Passover, it's difficult when your nephew or your niece or your daughter or your son says to you, and so what did you do? Right? That's difficult. It's having an impact. And then having to take the investor call and trying to explain what the pathway is. Now, we are not at speed and we are not at scale. And obviously, if state, national, international, governmental and intergovernmental processes were all lined up, we could go at greater speed and scale. So I just want to take my hat off to all of the local leaders in the room today that have kept America in the global conversation, because we have got very hard conversations that we're going to have in the next 10 years. And they will have to be collaborative, and they will have to be international and cooperative. But where I think businesses can continue to make the difference is in the constant drumbeat of the story of what could be done. What could be done if the investment was there? What could be done if the public-private dialogue was there? And not just about phasing out of coal, and not just about stopping doing stupid stuff, but about the extraordinary amount of investment we need in the green economy right now. If we're going to build green hydrogen and blue hydrogen economies, which are entirely technically possible and entirely affordable, we need to do it now, not in 10 years' time. And so there are things that have to happen that go well beyond the green economy. The resistance of political leaders at all levels to talking about the value of infrastructure investment, as opposed to being scared of the short-term cost of it, is something that we have to solve. It's not necessarily just a green economy conversation. I mean, we haven't been investing enough in infrastructure for the last 20 to 25, 30 years. We completely missed all of those years with negative interest rates. We completely missed the green ability to build back better after the financial crisis. So these are profound conversations about the value we put in the economy, investing in infrastructure, and that's where I think the business voice can be so important, because we're going to have to help local leaders stand up and talk about the value of investments that will be realized in time, maybe not tomorrow, but it's the value in them which is so much more important than the short-term cost. Maybe I'll stop there. Thank you.
Would any of you like to comment on some of the remarks that were made up here today?
I mean, I would say first that, the moment has always been urgent, but the fact that there's been so much inaction at the federal level, and not even inaction, in many cases just rolling back protections and making things far worse than they should be, it puts the responsibility on states. And luckily, fortunately, there are so many states who stepped up and answered the call for leadership. And I mean, in the 25 states that represent the U.S. Climate Alliance, these states are led by both Democrats and Republicans, and these are states that represent 55% of the United States population. These are states that also represent 60% of the U.S. GDP, and this commitment is going to go a long way from these states. We just need to get even more states on board. Unfortunately, we have to do it this way. I would love the opportunity to have the participation of the federal government in this work, but we don't have it, and we just kind of have to do what we have to do. But I can say between 2005 and 17, Alliance member states have reduced their collective emissions by 16%, compared to only 7% from non-member states. So there are a lot of things for us to be encouraged by. It's a lot, in the face of such opposition and in the face of all this frustration, some people are doing the right thing. But it's doing this so you get the ball rolling. I do truly believe in the snowball effect. Ironically, given the fact that we're talking about climate change and things warming up, I do believe in the snowball effect, that the more momentum, the more action you do see with these member states and states that are making commitments, more will naturally have to come on board. We'll get to a tipping point where it'll just be unsustainable to continue fossil fuel exploration. That's one thing we have to do, is stop fossil fuel and oil and gas production and expansion, and we have to be cognizant of our populations too. Specifically when it comes to indigenous and native communities, making sure that we are also respecting their sovereignty, as they have been the original leaders on the movement in the movement to protect our environment.
Great, wonderful, so true. Patricia, did you want to add anything?
Well, maybe just to Rachel's point about it's a marathon and a sprint, and the sprint piece, I did also want to add that Canada fully recognizes the need for greater ambition. We have committed to exceed the target we have for 2030, and we've also committed to set 5-year targets. This will be legislation that we'll be bringing forward that will require the setting of 5-year targets to have those important milestones along the way.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, I do have some questions, but I'm also happy to open up this conversation to the floor, since we only have about 15 more minutes. So if there are any questions, can you raise your hand, and we have a microphone coming around the room. If you could identify yourself with your name and affiliation, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, my name's Nikki Vandevort, and I'm a graduate student at the Presidio Graduate School. And currently I'm doing a case study for a class on climate action plans at the city level. And as we know, there's been some very courageous work done at the city level around climate action planning, but in my research, I'm finding that there tends to be a lot more vision in these plans than actual concrete steps toward implementing sometimes 80 or more recommendations for reducing greenhouse gases in these plans. And so there's a gap in monitoring and evaluation that would lead to better implementation. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how do we bridge that gap, how do we make sure that these plans that are all across the nation are actually getting implemented.
I don't have a complete answer, but I do think that, especially when you're dealing at the local level, you are, the ultimate success is when this is truly owned by the communities within the city. And so I do think that some of the really exciting stuff that I see in cities around the world is where you can use data tools to allow people to be able to see what's going on. So, everything from, using, and I think this has been done in Edmonton, in Canada and elsewhere, but using satellite data to be able to see what the heat performance of every building is within the city, and then start talking about, okay, well, how do we want to change that? Handheld methane monitors in the communities of colour and vulnerable communities around refineries and things like that. You put that power in the hands of communities, and then it becomes a much more real conversation about, okay, what do we want to have changed and how are we going to change it and how will we demand that the change actually happens. So I think that the bottom up and the top down meet at the city level, and that's just a partial piece of an answer, but also very happy to take it offline.
I would say too, this is just my imagination, is that a lot of cities just want to do something, right? And a big piece of this is just getting a car on the road without necessarily, it just depends on where you are too, right? And the way you explained it just made me feel like, so many places just want to jumpstart something, just want to say and think of everything to be entirely aspirational, with the hopes of truly getting something done at some point. But I think a lot of the attention is just focused, one, on the need to do something and what those things could potentially be. And I can't speak too much to the compliance and follow-up portion, though.
Maybe just 2 points to add to that. One is certainly the capacity at the municipal level is something that we recognize has to be reinforced, and we've been putting some money into that through various funds that community level organizations can apply for. In fact, just this morning I met some youth from Windsor who have just received a grant to support municipalities through planning and legal support through the University of Windsor. So those community level supports to capacity, very important. Also, I think it's the type of target. I mean, the emission reduction target, certainly there's a lag in the data, it's hard, but we need to use targets like, 90% emission-free electricity in Canada's case by 2030, and we're on track to meet that. Targets around 100% of EV sales by a certain year, in Canada's case, 2040. So those sort of more targets that are easier for people to see and measure progress towards, I think are an important part of this as well.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other questions? Over here, gentleman.
There's one in the middle.
Blue shirt, it looks like. Thank you.
How important is it to work to reestablish trust in public and private institutions for climate leadership?
I think it's very important, but the easiest way, I guess, to establish that trust is just to do the work. A lot of people, hear promises all the time from businesses and from politicians. But one thing that just can't be denied is that if the work is actually being done.
Yeah, I think it's fundamental, and I think there's a very important role for business here. It's very confusing, right? People are companies are coming out, and let's assume goodwill, right? So people are coming out and saying, "Oh, we'll have this target by here. We'll have that target by there." I mean, and if you look individual sectors, so if you just look within the oil and gas sector, or if you look just within the electricity sector, each company sort of frames it the way that, they're comfortable framing it. And then, as the consumer, you're trying to work out how to compare apples to apples, whatever. So there's a lot of organizations, many of them in the room, that help rank and help, help you understand which company is actually committing to do something materially important by which timeline. CDP do a fantastic job, and others in the room as well. But it is confusing. And then you've got this conversation around which are the ESG factors which really are material and really should be understood, and then what should the financial sector really be looking for. So it's a soup. Okay. Within all of that, some coming together, I think, will be essential. But what's also important is, every time you pass your words, every time you say you're going to do one thing and you spend your lobbying money doing another, you will simply crater the sure foundation that you will need to stand on. And I think that what's been promising to me in the last few months is that you're starting to see companies build a coherence within their program going forward. So yes, we're going to set a target. Yes, it's going to be science-based. No, we're not going to be lobbying anymore on the wrong side of the discussion. Yes, we're going to pull out of an industry association if it doesn't align and meet our... So you're starting to see more and more coherence. And I think, frankly, that's going to be absolutely essential going forward. And businesses are going to need people to trust them as well, right? That's where you cannot recruit. The students at Fletcher, the students at Tufts, they don't want to work for companies that don't have their values aligned with where they want to build their careers. And so, this is the time to start building back the trust.
Wonderful. Thank you. And the questions right here.
Hi, Nada from Exelon. So just building on that, you guys have all mentioned that there is a sort of momentum that you can see on the business side of things, on the financial institution side of things. What are, from your perspectives, some of the things that you still identify as gaps that need to be immediately addressed, like within the next few years, just to sort of avoid getting to those tipping points? And also, from a more adaptation perspective, what are some of the things that still need to be addressed?
I got one. You going first?
You go first. You're the elected official.
Diversifying this work. I think that's probably the biggest thing. Communities of color, lower income communities are the most impacted by climate change. And no offense to this room, but look around. Yeah. And I think that is something that we need to all work more diligently to do, to bring more people, again, into this conversation. Because I mentioned lower income communities because it's important, because although the climate issues impact lower income communities, the fact is it's really difficult for you to put food on the plate. It's very difficult for you to make rent every month. This is kind of one of the last things on your mind. You're not going to be too much concerned about, environmental issues, even though they are disproportionately impacting your life. However, it's important for us to do more work, reach outside of our comfort zones, and get people engaged. And I think that's the biggest gap that we have right now in this work.
Yeah, so let's take sort of a totally different example just to build on that point. We know that the food system is detrimental to the planet's health at the moment, and the food system isn't feeding people nutritiously. It's very difficult to produce that diet for everybody that is needed for the planet. We also know that the food system, the food that we eat, is the biggest driver in chronic disease. So we've got a food system that's broken. And so we can talk about how to develop a sustainable diet. And in fact, the Eat Lancet diet that was published last year or the end of 2018, indicates how you should be able to move towards a diet that we could all eat that would allow us to live within planetary boundaries. That diet is unaffordable to most people in about 117 countries, and especially to anybody living close to the poverty line. And that doesn't mean it's a bad piece of work. It's a good piece of work, but it means that the hard work is the system reform so that people living on low income in countries like this and people living on low income across Africa and Asia can afford that diet. So having this sort of climate narrative where we're all sort of talking about numbers over here and having the reality of, how do I put food on my plate that doesn't drive my family into diabetes and chronic heart problems, and which doesn't undermine my community and the ability of my future generations to live on this planet. It sounds like an existential crisis. It is, but it's a pocketbook issue. So, but the opportunity to broaden the dialogue by talking about the kind of food we want to eat at an affordable price, then you start winning all kinds of allies that we don't have at the moment. So this is the decade to get our stuff sorted out, figure out what are the least number of most important things that have to be done, and be really brave and courageous in going after them.
It's interesting that, the destination gets clear as we think about what net zero emission future can look like. Still lots of work to do on that, don't get me wrong. It's not like it's completely clear, but it is getting clearer, and the part that's less clear is the transition, how we get there, and how through that process we protect workers and communities in what is a significant transformation. So certainly, lots of discussion internationally around just transition. Canada's committed to just transition legislation and so on, but there's a lot more work to do in ensuring that transition is as smooth as it can be.
I think we have time for one more question. Is there anybody else? Okay. Oh, there's one more over here.
I don't know how you can see anything out there.
Gentleman is big.
Vincent Chris, the CEO of Elysis. One of the questions I have is, we heard earlier that climate is a local issue. How do you address the fact that you have production in low-cost countries that have huge carbon footprints, and that leads to import of, let's say, low-cost garden tables, and people actually have the choice then. And so on the one hand, there's export of jobs to some extent into the low-cost country, and you import back the high carbon footprint.
So this is the carbon leakage question, which is certainly central concern for policymakers, and certainly in designing Canada's carbon pricing system. That was key in terms of setting the levels of emission intensity in various industries around the allocation of output-based permits. So there are design questions and policies that can be brought to bear on that challenge. That's part of it. The other part of it is, of course, bringing along those developing countries in setting targets and in taking on an ambition and in seeing the opportunity that it presents for them in terms of catching the wave of what will be the growing industries and the clean growth areas that we already do see developing countries that are strong in certain industries benefiting enormously from that opportunity.
Yeah, so I think just to add to Ambassador Fuller's comments, all eyes on the EU and whatever experimentation with border tax adjustments or whatever proposals they come forward with, all eyes on the EU's summit with China in Leipzig just before the next round of climate talks in Glasgow in November. It has to be stated that there need to be forums where this is discussed amongst nations. And so it doesn't help when the dispute panel of the World Trade Organization is non-functioning at the moment because it doesn't have adjudicators. It doesn't help when we have voted into, power governments which are turning the other way from the institutions which, however clunky they may be, these are the places where these conversations have to take place. And so there is no way to get out of this mess that we're in without all of us working together. And these are the really difficult issues of diplomacy and of trade negotiation that will have to take place. And they will have to take place in some forum or another. And, at the moment, I think the Gs are pretty strained, G7, G20. WTO is not, exactly at its strongest point. The UN is struggling. This is not the deck that you would want to, the hand that you would want to be dealt, right? And so it really does matter. It really, there is so much you can do from the bottom up, but it really does matter that we have governments that are prepared to sit down, roll up their sleeves, and work together. And so therefore, it really is important what happens when people go to the ballot box.
Final comment?
In general or on that question?
Either way.
I think I covered it pretty well. No, I just want to thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for having us. There's still just so much more important work to be done, and it's easy. And I can talk too about being at COP25. There was a real frustration with not just the United States, but larger nations who could and should step up and do way more than they committed to. And regardless, like I said before, the inaction of the federal government, regardless of the setbacks that we are continuously being dealt, there are still great things happening. And even in my state, in lieu of our state legislature, we are there in a position to be able to support local government. I don't have the exact percentage, but it's fairly similar to the U.S. Climate Alliance states representing 55% of the population, 60% of U.S. GDP. Is sort of similar when it comes to cities and counties in my state, and those that have stepped up and make that commitment. And we have to work with them to make sure that we get it done. So please don't lose the faith is the point I want to leave you with. And we're going to continue just to do the right thing. I mean, it's not like something that's unlike anything we've ever been through before. There have always been times like this where people have been called to act in the face of inaction. That's the thing that we do have going for us. And we see so many people, especially young folks, who are getting out here, who are doing everything they can do, who are committing themselves to this movement. We should all feel very encouraged, knowing and not relying on them to get it done, but knowing that they are as passionate as they are about it, because it signals that the next generation is prepared to finish what we may not be able to.
That's a wonderful way to end this, and I think the takeaway of this super panel is to realize that there are avenues to move forward and to address this climate crisis, and three things that I heard today that are absolutes for what needs to be done on a very large scale, but is for institutions to employ target setting, to identify transformative solutions and effective pathways to get to those solutions, and to coordinate and communicate and work with disadvantaged communities to implement these solutions. So thank you, panelists. I appreciate you so much for being here. Okay, thank you. As our panelists leave the stage, I'm happy to introduce our next panel, which is called Leading the Way to Circular Economy. And these panelists are leaders from companies that are making sustainability and carbon management a core business part of their business by achieving great progress and setting an example. So joining us up here today are Eva Gladek, CEO, Metabolic, who's the moderator. I'll take a minute while you... And Ingrid Ryck, Vice President of Procurement and Sustainability, Anheuser-Busch. Suzanne Lindsay-Walker, Chief Sustainability Officer of UPS. And Leah Lawrence, President and CEO, Sustainable Development Technology, Canada. Welcome. And I will turn this panel over to Eva, who's the moderator for it.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm just going to grab this clicker. So before I allow all the panelists to introduce themselves, first I'm just going to briefly say something about myself and show you a few pictures to set the stage for the discussion on the circular economy. So as I was just introduced, my name is Eva Gladek. I'm the founder and CEO of Metabolic. We're an organization based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, although we do a lot of work in the United States as well. And we consist of actually multiple organizations, a consultancy, a think tank, and a venture building arm that are working together like different organs in one body toward one mission, which is to transition the global economy to a fundamentally sustainable and circular state, and to do that as quickly as possible. And we're doing that by identifying leverage points in the system, so places where we can take action that will have a disproportionate effect on on transitioning the system as a whole. So the circular economy is a really, really big topic in Europe and increasingly here in the United States. I just want to see a show of hands from all of you. If you feel like you're really familiar with the topic of the circular economy, you've heard a lot about it, please raise your hand. Okay, and if you feel like you don't really know what the circular economy is about, please raise your hand. Okay, so most of you are quite familiar with it. That's really good news. So one of the things I wanted to start out by pointing out is how important the circular economy is in actually achieving our climate ambitions. And that's one of the reasons why this panel is here. All of you are probably familiar with this graphic. This is the famous butterfly diagram from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which shows all the ways in which we could be processing the different materials that are going through our economy and falling out as waste, instead of doing that and actually gathering them at their highest possible value and putting them back into the system. So fundamentally, the circular economy is about designing a system that is regenerative and waste-free by design. And that is also an opportunity to save a huge amount of money. So in Europe alone, up to $630 billion per year could be saved by transitioning 12 sectors. But of course, we can't just be focusing on materials and the value of those materials. There's lots of ways that we can optimize for these material cycles and keep things cycling at highest value possible while creating externalities or unexpected problems. So this is a picture of a child sitting in a huge pile of e-waste. And a lot of our e-waste is still processed in this way, where materials are gotten out over open pit fires. But of course, this is not actually resulting in a system that we would call circular. It's creating huge amounts of pollution, huge amounts of effects on human health. So this actually makes us think that, or should point to the realization that the circular economy can't just focus on the optimization of materials, but rather take into account energy systems, human health and well-being, biodiversity as well. So in short, we can, for example, make a system for recycling that also has huge carbon emissions, and we don't want to do that. So we have to look at how these things are linked. And this whole trade-off discussion is one of the things that I want to bring up with the panelists today. So before I hand over to the introduction here for everyone to introduce themselves, I wanted to say one last thing, which is that in order to move toward a circular economy, we actually require the energy transition to work and for climate change to work, and also vice versa. A recent study that we did for the Dutch government showed that I heard a lot about electric vehicles, for example, in the last hour and a half. But actually, we can't move towards a system where we have electric vehicles without actually achieving that circular economy, because we simply don't have enough metal in circulation. So we actually have to figure out how to design electric vehicles and design battery systems where we're recovering those materials in order for us to even be able to achieve that IPCC set of targets. And likewise, we're able to achieve, for example, 70% reduction in carbon emissions in the economy as a whole if we actually move towards circularity. So with that in mind, I would love to have each of the panelists introduce themselves and what they're doing in their organizations, and we're going to go into the circular economy examples for each of these organizations in a moment.
Sure. Well, thank you, Eva. And thank you for having us here. We're really excited to be part of this. My name is Ingrid Ryck, and the way I like to introduce myself is the following. I get to shop for a living, and I get to help make the world a better place. So I'm in charge of procurement and sustainability at Anheuser-Busch. There was a lot of talk in the earlier panel about having drinks. I sincerely hope that was our beloved Budweiser that you were talking about. Anyway, here to talk about circularity and sustainability. I'd like to leave you with one main message. At Anheuser-Busch, sustainability it's not just part of our business. It's not just related to our business. It is our business. Just picture that fresh Budweiser pint again. Beer is, in essence, a natural product. It is brewed with the finest quality ingredients. So, a healthy environment and thriving communities in which our operations are based on are vital components of that brewing process. That is why this is our business. At its core, our business actually combines natural inputs into the beers and the beverages that our consumers know and enjoy. But more than that, those materials that we use, they go from the biological cycle, which are our agricultural inputs, our agricultural products, like barley, rice, and hops, to the finer materials like aluminum and glass. What you may not know is that Anheuser-Busch is highly verticalized as a supply chain. We have a hop farm in the state of Washington. We have a rice mill in Jonesboro, Arkansas. We have multiple malting plants. We have our own can production facilities, a glass plant in Houston. We obviously have multiple breweries all across the nation. And we even own our own distributorships. So why am I telling you this? I hope it's clear that exactly that setup of our supply chain allows us to integrate circularity in every aspect of it. Our business model hence integrates primarily circularity in those both sides of the butterfly that you showed earlier on, agricultural inputs as well as packaging materials. But how we really bring it to life is through our 2025 sustainability goals. And they focus on 4 main aspects, 4 key focus areas. Smart agriculture, where we work with more than 1,000 farmers across the nation every day. Circular packaging, water stewardship, and renewable electricity and carbon action. So those overarching sustainability goals, they reflect, every single one of them reflects circularity. A couple of examples, and I'll be fast, but one that I want you to keep in mind is when we use those agricultural inputs, at the end of the brewing process, there is an unused portion of those. I don't know if you ever thought about that, but that unused portion is highly protein-rich. It's fibers. So today we sell them as cattle feed. So in a way, it goes back to the land where it all started. Another example of circularity more towards the packaging materials is steel kegs. When you go over the weekend or even after a rough day at work to your favorite bar or your favorite restaurant and you order that wonderfully crisp, fresh Budweiser from the tap, sorry, I'm going to shamelessly just advertise here, right? Yeah. You order that from the tap, it is from a steel keg. Once that keg is empty, it gets shipped back to the brewery. We clean it, we fill it back with the new brewing cycle. We can do that with the same keg for more than 30 years, 30, with the same keg. That is the best example of circularity when it comes to packaging. To come to the challenge, unfortunately, only 6 to 7% of our business here in the US is in that keg business, but still it is one of our best examples of circularity. So in closing, I gave you a couple of examples, but this is, we know and we acknowledge very well that there is a long way ahead of us to get to a real circular economy. As Anheuser-Busch, we will lead the way and we will lead our industry forward.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So Suzanne, Lindsay-Walker, I'm Chief Sustainability Officer for UPS and also the Vice President of Environmental Affairs. So I'm thrilled to be back in Detroit. I am from here. I grew up in Plymouth, Michigan. I am a Michigander, and I want to, being from Michigan, you are influenced a lot by the Canadian culture, and so I just want to say thank you to the Canadian contingent. Thank you for Tim Hortons and for Degrassi High.
Thank you about teaching me about the cans, because I didn't know that until recently.
So again, thrilled to be back home. I've only been with UPS for about 7 months now. My background is predominantly in the retail space. I was in PetSmart and corporate sustainability, as well as the Kroger company. And most recently came from a company called Brambles, and they are a circular business model. And they do that through the share and reuse of pallets, crates, containers, and kegs as well. So, coming to UPS about 7 months ago, it's my entire career in one opportunity, and I'm thrilled to represent them here today. So, enough about me. So, when you think about UPS, we don't make a whole bunch of stuff, but we move a lot of it through our smart global logistics network. In fact, 3% of the GDP moves through our system. And so we have an important part to play in facilitating the circular economy. And in fact, I believe that we are uniquely positioned to enable our customers to become more circular. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But there are two sort of key buckets that we are enabling customers' strategies today. The first bucket is around optimizing through reverse logistics. So whether that's, helping retailers to recover their goods to the highest value and ways to do that, whether that's having 150,000 pickup and drop-off locations throughout the world so that we can consolidate, or we call it creating synthetic density, so that we can reduce cost and carbon within the supply chain. We also have a lab that we use to help our customers to test and iterate designs for reusable and returnable packaging that they're looking to influence or integrate into our system. And so those are just a couple of things that we're doing today. But then also from a circular perspective in our own operations is through the use of renewable natural gas. We have invested significantly in RNG, and of course it's used from the decomposition of organic sources through using methane, and we use that to power our fleet. So again, we haven't figured everything out. We are a massive company with a huge network, but have the ability to help others to facilitate what they're wanting to do from a circular perspective as well.
Great. And Leah, you are coming from a quite different angle. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you're working toward the circular economy?
Sure, thank you. And thank you to the people on the stage here, and thank you to the organizer of this conference, because it's really fun to bring together two important subjects that need to be brought together, and so how opportune of a moment. I think I would just start by saying I have never been more positive than ever that we're going to not only meet the 2050 zero emissions targets, but also zero waste. And I want to talk about that for 3 reasons. The first reason is that I'm lucky. I sit at the head of an organization that's the largest funder of small and medium-sized technologies in Canada, and we're not really sure, and somebody can correct me later, but it might be globally as well. We invest about 150 million Canadian dollars every year in innovators. They can be from, yesterday I met with this guy who started 3 people started a company in their garage, which, by the way, about 30% of innovations come from there, but we don't measure it, all the way to university accelerators and all those kinds of things. And that really makes me excited, because what those folks talk about every day is, how do we increase carbon soil content by 10% and increase food production? How do we use robotics and data and all of these kinds of things that were mentioned related to logistics to improve transportation? How do we really figure out circular economy, recognizing that right now there's no way to recycle lithium-ion batteries? And we just funded 2 companies in that regard. So I'm kind of lucky, because those are the kind of people I get to see every day. And those are the kind of people we all need to see more of, because they really have the ideas. And that takes me to the second reason that I'm positive, but also that it's important that we see those people. The world's not linear, okay? We've been working on this for a long time, and some of the other panelists in the previous panel really talked about the important public policy at all levels that has been going forward over the last couple of decades. And that's the important thing. You have to remember that, yeah, it's been a tough slog some days up until now, and for those of us who are a little bit older and have been around for most of those 3 decades, it's been a really tough slog for some of those decades. But you know what? I can see now that things are starting to accelerate, and we're probably breaking free into the exponential stage. And that's what we need, and that's the excitement. The challenge, though, and I'm going to be a little controversial given the folks on the stage, is, Clayton Christensen just passed away, and what did he tell us? Actually, most of the transformational systemic innovation that's going to come to transform every economic sector and global economic and environmental prosperity isn't going to come from the incumbents. It's not. That's not how it works. We know that. And so we really have to think that through, because as the elected official in the previous panel was talking about, the challenge is we don't know where those people are often. We don't know how to talk to them. We don't invite them to conferences like this. Are there any startup entrepreneurs here? Ah, okay, there's a couple. You need to meet those people if you didn't meet them, okay. Because, any economists, let me ask that question. I can put my hand up there. Okay, here's the thing. Economists think of the world, except that now we're getting into AI a little bit, so it's different, but think of the world as not a hockey stick. Entrepreneurs, you guys think of the world as a hockey stick, right? And you know what? That's because we assume, let's get a little technical, that there's this exogenous thing called innovation just happens at some point. And then guess what? A hockey stick does happen in many, many cases. So how we figure out, not just talk that jargon and kind of language, but actually figure out how we get predictive on where innovation is going to come from and how we integrate it fast, that is the quintessential problem of our time. And so it's important that we start integrating those kinds of conversations, as was mentioned on the previous. And the third point I think I would just make, and this is to build on what you said, Eva, is that I asked my team, because they're the smart ones in the crowd, and when we go to anything, and unfortunately I'm the only one here, so you don't get to meet them, but I said to them, okay, so so Canada is like the US in that we're really bad at recycling. Only about 9 or 10% of the stuff that should be recycled is recycled. And I said, okay, if we took all that stuff and recycled it, what would it mean to national greenhouse gas emissions in Canada? And the answer was a reduction of 10%. So something we should have been doing anyway for a long time, and actually thought we were maybe doing it better than we are doing it, would make a 10% improvement. That's huge. And so you're so right. We have to integrate those two things. Because if we do it wrong and we don't get that 10%, then that's something we should, kick ourselves for. And I think that's the last thing I'll maybe do is talk just about how it's important to really get excited and to move forward with action. But it's also important to understand where we've made mistakes. So first question, anybody know what Jevons paradox is?
Yeah.
Okay. Jevons paradox says that energy efficiency actually doesn't reduce emissions. Okay, so anybody who's looking at the climate model stuff, there's a big chunk for energy efficiency to get reductions, right? So we got to figure out that and make sure that we don't repeat history, because by the way, that paper was late 1800s. Okay. Second thing was mentioned on the earliest panel, that in Edmonton, we're doing great things on buildings and reducing emissions, but actually New York's done some really great work too, which says that LEED certified buildings with a lot of glass, they're not better, they're worse. We got to not make those mistakes. We got to really be focused on those kinds of things. And anyway, we could go on and on. So not only do we need to get excited and integrate all generations and ideas and get to system thinking, but we need to make sure that we understand where we've been and not repeat those errors. And I'll stop there.
Great. Well, thank you for those really great introductions from different perspectives. So you did start out, your second point was indeed quite provocative. You're saying, okay, well, innovation is not going to come from organizations like Anheuser-Busch and UPS. But yet, I know from reading your websites that you are doing quite a lot of innovative work and actually trying to get things moving forward. So I guess I'd like to start a little bit of a debate between you three on this topic. So I think,
well, that's fun, right? Otherwise it'd be really boring.
Well, I mean, we need to have a fun discussion. It's the last panel of a very long session, so a debate sounds good. Organizations often do have difficulty being nimble and self-disrupting. How do you feel like your two organizations, just like quickly, are doing at actually self-disrupting? So looking at what has to happen in the market to really create the systems change and saying, okay, well, we're going to do that and take that action.
So I'll go first. UPS has been around for 117 years, and we hope to be around for another 117 years. And to your very point is the reason why we have invested a tremendous amount of resources in, Upstarts, which is our innovation platform that we're trying to, leverage the 500,000 employees that are there today, and what can we do differently. We have spent a tremendous amount of time in what's called transformation, where we recognize that we need to disrupt ourselves before someone else disrupts us. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to come to UPS. It's such a legacy company, and I think we're unexpected to drive innovation, and I think that's what is, I think, exciting for me to be a part of this company is that we are investing in electrifying our fleet. We are investing in renewable natural gas and leading the way in that regard. Packaging. How do we enable circular, business models, and from a packaging perspective, through our partnerships, like with Loop, with TerraCycle. You may have heard of them, and you could talk a little more about that. But so introducing ourselves and disrupting ourselves and creating new partnerships and challenging ourselves in a way that has really not been done before. And that to me is what's exciting. And and we can't do it in a vacuum. We do need to do it through partnerships and, unexpected maybe partnerships with competitors even. So, I'm excited about what the next 117, I won't be around, but certainly, maybe. I think we've taken it to heart. We have to move quickly. We have to go farther, faster, and we're making the appropriate investments that are going to allow us to get there.
Great. So what do you think, Ingrid? How about you and Anheuser-Busch at self-disruption?
So we have a couple of platforms that we're operating under. We are a beer and by extension a beverage company. So when we talk about self-disruption, it's really within that space in the first place. So we have a separate part of our organization that is called ZX Ventures. That is, its sole unique purpose is to disrupt the beer category. So it's kind of internal competition. They're going to be spearheading wine in cans, for instance. So that's a direct competition with our beer product. So it's a setup, it's a global organization, and it's been around for a couple of years now. So that's on the beverage side, so disruption. When we think about the concept or the purpose of this conference, then I would like to talk about our 100 Plus Accelerator platform. That is a global platform that we have created to bring together scientists, students, entrepreneurs. The one entrepreneur in the room that was there, please come and find us afterwards. Just people who are passionate and who have a great idea from all around the world. We call them, invite them to participate in our accelerator program. We started it up 2 years ago. This year we launched 6 challenges that are relevant for our business, and when we're able to solve them, relevant for the sustainability of our business, when we're able to solve them, then at least we can use our scale to really have a big impact there. So the ones that are out there this year, they really talk about the usage of energy and water consumption. It is mainly about packaging materials, which is a big challenge here, specifically in the US. And it is also about how can we use some of our agricultural byproducts and to make a link to the previous panel, use it for the good and to feed the world and have some more nutritious food available there. So that's our accelerator program. But aside from that, what we really do well is brew beer and sell beer and build brands, right? So that's the essence of our company. If we want to, we don't pretend to be the experts on sustainability, by no means. Although my team is very expertise in it, we are no experts whatsoever. So we'd rather partner and use our scale with those partners that know how to do it, know how to change it. So we are not a transportation company, although we are known for one of our biggest orders when it comes to hydrogen trucks out there. So that's how we like to do it. We like to use our scale and partner with people who know how to make a difference.
Great. So if we envision both of your organizations in a fully circular state, so zero waste entirely across the supply chain and also zero emissions, because that's also non-circular, taking fuel, a really complex material, and vaporizing it into CO2, I would imagine that you would both say there's still quite a long way to go to really close all those loops, make sure that no packaging is getting thrown out. And from your perspective in terms of investing in new technologies, there's also, even though you're an optimist and that's great, I agree with that, I'm sure there's still some gaps. What I'm curious about is, if you were to imagine something that you all already know of that you think, okay, well, this could really advance us towards this objective of the circular economy, but you're not able to do it. So I'd like to quickly hear from each of you, what is an example of something that you, an opportunity that you see, what would that be, and why is it that you're not able to now realize that opportunity? Anyone who has
I'll go.
top of mind
I can
example?
Go. So 2,500 facilities globally, we'd need to be 100% renewable energy. When I think about we have a carbon problem in every, when I was brought on, my remit is to figure out what's next at UPS and how do we address that and go farther faster. And we're doing the investments in RNG from our package cars and our feeder fleet, but we're also the 8th largest airline on the planet. And there is a massive, we can do everything we can do around energy and, zero tailpipe emissions. But if we're not addressing the airline, that is a massive footprint that needs to be addressed. Electrifying aircraft is not anywhere near where we are. There is an opportunity with sustainable aviation fuel, but today it's hardly made anywhere in the world, and it's the cost is the delta is so cost prohibitive that we're not there yet. So there is a price of entry barrier for us to get there. There's a scalability barrier because of trying to get the the refineries, et cetera, to be able to make the SAF. So, I mean, there is something that we have every interest in trying to scale and participate in, but it is a tremendous barrier today that we're going to have to continue to work at and be at the right tables and you know, to move forward.
Yeah. Though I think if you are talking about biofuel for aviation, is that
Yep.
I would definitely say that that's where one of those trade-off issues comes in, because we are already putting so much pressure on land systems, et cetera. But I think the points that you raise are spot on,
Yeah.
these scaling issues. So what about, Leah, do you have, from like the technology side, do you see any opportunities that are not being invested in and where your optimism is flagging potentially?
Well, I think maybe I'll reframe your question slightly, because the thing is, the problem is we start with the technology. And actually the issue isn't technology, it's humans. And I don't mean humans, you know, I mean humans getting their mind around how you might accelerate the adoption of something. And so, you know, I have a staff of engineers. I love them. I was trained as an engineer early on. And the thing about it is that, you know, I'll just tell you a little story from inside baseball. Like, they'll come to me and they'll say, oh, this thing is technology ready, it's beautiful. And I'll go, great. And so then they usually go, it's commercial. I'll go, great. How many times has it been deployed? And they'll go, never. I'll go, so it's not really commercial. And the reason it isn't commercial is because people haven't figured out how to buy it. They don't know how to, like, let's take a school. I don't know about how schools are funded in Michigan, but how they're funded in the province that I live in is you're funded on an annual operating basis related to something. Okay, so if you install energy efficiency equipment, you actually lose, which will have, say, a 3-year payback. You'll actually lose that funding the next year, so you don't ever install it. So that's just a very simple one. There's like many, many more that get into large institutional issues. But the point being is that something that should be making sense to deploy that would reduce waste and reduce emissions, it's the whole infrastructure and systemic buying situation in every institution that is the issue. Okay, and that's really hard to do, because procurement, people like to optimize around, let's buy a solar panel, which could be great, but to your point, maybe you should, not you, but people should be, you as in we, should be optimizing around something else to start. And I guess the second thing that we really get challenged in is, we talk about hydrogen and recycling in the same breaths. These things all have, and we, you know, where I work, we fund everything from fusion to better waste handling, waste sorting at municipal facilities. So, but you know, those things are 5, 10, 15, 20, 30-year time horizon, and we need to start being more thoughtful in how we talk to people about, okay, how do you take options in all of those things, and how do you understand and give hope to those things that can be done now, knowing you're still going to have to take some bets on stuff that comes later. And this is a really hard conversation when you go talk to public policy people. Because, oh, really? I'm taking bets on stuff that might not work 5 years from now? That gets really scary. But you know what? That's where we have to get the language to, because you know what? We're going to make mistakes in policy and technology and ideas and business practice. We're going to make mistakes in all those things. That's okay. We just have to be able to know quickly we made that mistake, correct it, and try to do next time something better the next time. And that's what I think about all the time is our systemic issues. That I can't solve. So hopefully you guys can, because I can't.
Well, you know, before this panel, we actually had a bit of a discussion with 3 of us in the speakers room, and we were talking about these potential barriers towards moving to a circular economy. And of course, financing came up as a topic, and another topic that came up is really the consumer, so the people side. So how do you get consumers to actually be informed, to understand the kind of behind-the-scenes trade-offs and actually demand the correct things and also want to pay for them? So in light of that, Ingrid, and also in light of this question of are there kind of circular opportunities that you see that you're unable to realize within Anheuser-Busch, what would you say to that?
I think as a beverage company, our biggest challenges are really revolving around recycling and reusage of packaging materials. And that's where we need consumer mindset to pivot. Or you could look at it from the other way around, and then it becomes a chicken versus the egg type of conversation. Do you need to put in place the business model first, and then the consumer will adopt it and will change behavior as a consequence, right? What comes first? Who's going to invest? Who's going to make that first step? That's kind of a struggle that we're dealing with. So we haven't solved that, but we're committed to finding a solution there. On the other hand, what we do know is, I said, brew great beers, and secondly, we do know how to interact with consumers. That's our business, right? We know how to build brands and interact with those consumers. So we do try to use our brands as a big messaging route or vehicle to bring our message around sustainability and circularity really to every single consumer. I don't know, I mean, we're in the US, football is the most popular sport, so there's one big media moment every year, which is Super Bowl. I'm pretty sure you all watched it. Last year in Super Bowl, we brought the first ever, on our end at least, commercial that was 100% dedicated to sustainability. So it was our Budweiser with the wind farm and then the Clydesdales and so on. I don't know if you've ever saw it, but it's on YouTube. So that was our way to create a big momentum and talking about renewable electricity and how Budweiser invested in the Budweiser wind farm in Oklahoma. So that was one big moment, but then it's just one moment. How do you create that ongoing consumer engagement to teach and educate consumers about it? Then we translate that into our packaging, because when you are in Super Bowl and it's a big media moment, you're like in the eyes of the consumer once. But how do you create that recurrent interaction is when you get it into their hands, right? So when the consumer chooses the beer on the aisle, he takes the pack and sees the packaging. When they take a bottle and they drink from the bottle or the can, they see the packaging. So packaging is one of our major communication vehicles for anything, basically. So when you pick up a Budweiser, you will see that there is an RE100 symbol there, because every single Budweiser in North America has been brewed with renewable electricity. So those are two big things that we do to use our brands. We have a whole portfolio of beer brands, so it does not only mean Budweiser. We use Bud Light to have aluminum cups in a Super Bowl stadium rather than plastic cups, because it's eternally recyclable, for instance. So we're going to use our entire portfolio of brands to bring our sustainability and circularity message to the consumers as a way of educating our consumers.
Great. So maybe back to the two of you, Leah, and then Suzanne. Yeah. If you were able to change something in the way that humans behave or some aspect of mindset in order to advance the circular economy and the kind of energy transition simultaneously, what would it be? Is there something that comes to mind also from your experience working with either SMEs and startups or consumers?
Yeah, well, I think it's the consumer. It's a difficult conversation that needs to start with consumers. Our business sits at the intersection of exploding e-commerce, rapid urbanization, and all of these things have I think obvious trade-offs, but then maybe not so obvious ones. And so trying to, through our customers, as we're B2B, we have a brand with consumers, but certainly what we're trying to do is to have that difficult conversation and asking, do you really need that Crest toothpaste tomorrow, or could you wait and consolidate your packages for a Saturday delivery? Could you leverage one of our access points so that we're not having to go to your house 3 times before you're actually home? And introducing those concepts. And so there are several e-tailers that are very open to that. Also, offering carbon neutral shipping through them as well. So there is this opportunity for us to, invite customers and consumers into this discussion and to help this, right? I mean, so we're going to continue to deliver packages and do what we do, but consumer can help, because I don't think they recognize the kinds of trade-offs that they're contributing to, and expect the UPSs and the Anheuser-Busch's to just figure it out. Mm-hmm. right?
Yeah, I would just spot on. Consumers will make a choice, right? And our insights data tells us that, especially millennials, they will make a choice for a product that is more environmentally friendly, or at least perceived to be more environmentally friendly than another. So they want to make the right choice. They just want that choice to be convenient. So indeed, to your point on that Crest toothpaste, they want it today because now they're out of toothpaste. So it needs to be convenient. It also needs to be cost neutral, which is interesting. So consumers are not willing to pay up at all for environmentally friendly products. So that places a challenge on us as a producer, as a beverage manufacturer, to solve that.
Yeah, so how about from your angle, because you're the one who also brought up the fact that technology wasn't the problem, it's people that are the problem.
Yeah, but I didn't mean cost, so I'll just be cautious. So first of all, I would say this is moving really fast, okay? Like as in people are requiring same cost and environmental benefit at the same time today. This has happened really fast in the last 6 months to a year. So the conversation about trade-offs and cost actually is changing as we speak. So I would just start with that. Second, actually one of our criteria is you have to be equal cost or lower cost and environmental. You don't actually get our money unless you're both. So nobody in fact, we are very cautious about investing in anybody that is thinking they're going to get a government subsidy in perpetuity or even for 5 years. Because innovation actually, over the history, if you look at innovation and energy efficiency and all these things, reduces the cost of things in a market over time, because as you get a critical mass of people buying them, the cost goes down, always. So what you need is early adopters to create, often with people who are making profits and are doing things. And actually, that's the thing that I'm talking about in humans. What we have right now is a lack of adoption because people are afraid to go first, okay? And that's a generic thing of conservancy and risk aversion because of lots of other systems, you know, market systems, financial systems, all these kinds of things. But most of the companies that we see today, you know, to get to a commercial state, they need to be able to partner with some folks like your two companies here because they need to figure out how to get things that are not environmental. How do you make sure you meet food safety regulations? How do you make sure that your transportation is actually logistically planned appropriately and routed? All these things. So they need to build upon the know-how and the amazing knowledge that these larger firms have. But at the same time, they're going to have to experiment a few times to get costs down because you're never going to be low cost on your first product. So the most successful companies that we see, they are able to iterate and they're able to find a partner that's willing to iterate with them. And I think that's what some of the innovation programs that you've been talking about are. And then what happens is there has to be a commitment to scale. So what you're doing is you're learning together to how to do things completely differently. This isn't about some marginal thing at the edge. This is about systemically changing the underpinning of every economic system that we have so it's low carbon and low waste. This is not an easy problem. And it's not going to be done by the consumer alone, let's be clear, right? So what we need to do is really understand things in a much different way than we do today, and understand that innovation actually over time does become lower in cost. That's actually the entire last industrialized. Nobody sat around and talked about what the Industrial Revolution would be like, but in fact, that's what happened. The first stuff was more expensive, and then we got it to be figured out, and now, that's why we have all this great quality of life globally. But you know what? To do something differently, you have to start out by willing to take risks and to not necessarily have consumers pay higher costs in the beginning, but to be creative enough to break through that innovation phase. And one of our challenges today is, the early adopter phase is not quite long enough to get mass deployment in some of these technologies. For example, if you're trying to do hydrogen or any of these things, like some of these things cost hundreds of millions of dollars, not a couple $1 million as an angel investment. Like if you really want transformative change, it's going to cost significant money over time. But that's because you're changing the underpinnings of the capital stock of your economy over time. And that's why it's important to talk about short, medium, and long term and how the humans figure out how to do business differently.
Well, that's a great, unfortunately, it has to be the closing statement because we're out of time here. But I really enjoyed this brief conversation. I hope that you all get to potentially ask some questions during the reception if Ingrid, Suzanne, and Leah are able to stick around. And I think that this presents at least some interesting perspectives about what's going on in the kind of innovation space, both in large organizations and in SMEs, and this kind of whole tidal wave of transition that has to be driven forward by all of us in order to actually succeed in this 10-year challenge, this 10-year sprint that we're facing. So thank you all, and I hope you have a great evening. And yeah, see you all at the reception.
I love what you guys are doing. There's still some really great stuff in logistics and transportation. It's so fun, isn't it? It's so fun.
Okay, what a great set of panels to end in the plenary session this afternoon. You know, I could always say a few comments about each one of them, but we want to make sure that we close pretty quickly. But one of the things, you know, talking about, I just have to say this, one of the things talking about a circular economy, when I was at EPA, we did some work on this, and we actually determined when you look at greenhouse gases, about 42% of the greenhouse gases in the United States have some association with materials management. You know, it's not all caused directly by it, but some association. And the interconnections of everything that we heard from the panel were pretty astounding. And I remember my calculus classes where somebody told me there's an infinite number of sides to a circle. So circular economy, infinite number of things you have to deal with, and I think it's a really important part to proceed on. So I want to thank you guys for that discussion. It really is part of the challenge. It's another one of those intersecting things, and you know, beyond just looking at what's happening with electricity or cars or anything else, but what about the stuff they're made out of? So I think that that's really important. And before we kick off the reception, and I know all that discussion made some of us thirsty. Before we kick off, I want to recognize the platinum level sponsors who are helping us put this conference on, and that's IBM, Dominion Energy, and the Nature Conservancy. And so we really appreciate their support. Obviously, these are companies and organizations that appreciate the ability of bringing everybody together. So I hope you can all join me on the 4th floor. You have to go up 2 escalators, and there's something waiting up there. At the reception, and I want to remind everybody that we're going to start here tomorrow morning at 8:30. So make sure you get some good night rest so you're ready to engage, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the morning. Thanks, everyone. Great day, and I really enjoyed all the panels. Thank you.